up there in about, I'd say it was around 62, 63 when we moved up to the farm. And it was with my uncle, and my dad bought the farm, and we bought it off a family called Crosses. They bought it off of this family Potriff, which they moved across the road from us and built their own little farm. Well, when we moved out there, there was nothing done. We didn't have any cattle at the time or anything, so everything was pretty quiet. All I can remember is one night, it was in the middle of the summertime, that I heard a barn door move and, you know, like close or something like that, like maybe the wind would catch it, but there was no wind.
Okay.
And after that, I heard distinct sound of gravel moving, like something dragging on the gravel from the barn area, and it got closer to the house, and it went underneath our bedroom window out to the road. I told my parents about that the next morning, and my dad says, well, why didn't you look out and see what it was? Well, me being as young as I was, I said, yeah, right, sure. But anyways, the next time it did happen, I can't remember the separation in time when the next time it occurred. I heard it, and it was coming closer, and I went over to the window, and I just hanging on to the sill with my knuckles, like I can imagine they were white. And I was scared, I was sweating. And I said, well, I'm thinking to myself, well, what if it looks up and sees me? And you know, all sorts of things go through a young kid's head like that.
Yeah.
So anyways, when it came just below the window, I jumped up quick and jumped down. And I said to myself, there's nothing there. And the noise had stopped. And I felt pretty proud about it. So I stood right up and I looked out there both ways, the barn, laneway, out to the road, nothing. The leaves weren't even rustling. It was still as hell. So I went and laid in my bed. The noise started where it stopped. Next morning they found me underneath the bed. So I told my dad and both my parents about it again. And Mom says, oh boy, there must be something to this or something. So she called across the road to Mrs. Potriff. And Mom said she was quiet for a while, and then she said, I better tell you the story. And she told her the story. The original owners, the people that built the farm, the woman was home alone. Somebody came to rob them, and I don't know if they hit her over the head or whatever. Anyway, she ended up in the manure pile, buried there, and the ammonia apparently in the manure revived her enough that she drug herself out to the road, and that's where they found her dead.
Ooh.
So that's the story from Mrs. Potriff, and we didn't know anything about it before that happened. I, as the oldest sibling, heard it. Nobody else heard it. And when I moved out, the next oldest sibling, my sister, heard it. And that's how it went. There was another ghost in the barn. It was one of the hired hands that they had back then, apparently. Me and my brother both seen that one. It was up in the hay mow in the higher section part. And when we climbed up there, we were up there going after a swing. We had a rope up there on the rafters. We were swinging from one hay mow to the other, eh?
Yeah.
And so when I climbed up the ladder first, I seen the shadow, and it moved across the wall, the far wall from there. And I quietly said to my brother, I says, come here, come here. I said, I think there's somebody up here. He came up and he looked over there, and he seen it go and disappear behind the bales that were along the wall. So we quickly ran down into the house and told Dad about it, you know.
Yeah.
He went up there and came back out and said, there's nothing there. He says, what are you talking about? So we found out that story from Mrs. Potriff as well. The caretaker was up in there pitching hay, and he fell on the rake, or the pitchfork, killed himself. So those are the two stories there. But I didn't know this one until actually pretty recent. We were talking, my brother and me were talking about all these events on the farm, and he told me about the event him and his friend Tom had when nobody was there except for the two of them. And he was in the front room, both of them were watching TV. And back then we just had the black and white TVs. And he says it just went like one of the tubes blew or something like that, and it was just static white shh going like that.
Okay.
And they thought, oh shit, the TV's going again or something like that. And he says all of a sudden the lights in the house flashed off and on, off and on, off and on like this. Tom says, this is getting strange. So they looked around, and all of a sudden the back door opened, bang, like this. Tom says, that's enough. They ran out to the car, and he says, as they were going by the house, the back door slammed shut, and the lights kept flashing off and on.
That's a sign, eh?
Yeah, that was a sign to leave. So there's been quite a bit of things around the farm. And I was a kid, before we moved out the farm, we lived on Quigley Side Road. And I used to drive my bicycle around all over the place, and one of the places I liked to go was up Mount Albion Road, the old one, past the golf course and up the hill. And there was a couple farms there. They had the horse chestnuts there. And I used to collect those in the spring and whenever they were out. And we used to use them for knockers, eh?
Okay.
And anyways, I'd go up there, and then I'd go farther where the jog went to Mount Albion Road on the top. And right on the corner there, I can show you that where the church used to be. The cemetery is still there. And I was driving by there one day, and I noticed opposite from the cemetery, on the other side of the road, just up from the ditch, was one grave by itself with a wrought iron fence around it. I at first didn't think too much of it, and then I thought, that's strange. Why is it by itself up there? That's the only one. I figured, okay, maybe it was overcrowded in there and they didn't have any place to put them.
Yeah.
But as years went by, I found out that that is supposed to be a warlock, and he can't be buried in hallowed ground. And that's why he's there. And to this day, that one's there. The church isn't there anymore. That's too bad, because it was one of the oldest ones around.
Oh yeah?
It was here when Mount Albion was a village. I went to Binbrook a few times. I played baseball, and I went to scouts there in the community hall, the old one. And here again, I'm riding my bicycle, and one evening I'm coming back from a practice. I'm coming up Concession 7 to Kirk Road. They call it Harrison Road, Kirk Road. It's been changed so many times. Anyways, I'm coming up to make my left turn on there, and there's an old schoolhouse right on the corner. And I know the family that lived in there when we were there. It was Wright's family, and it was converted into a house. It's still there, and it's converted into a house. I don't know the people that live in there now. But as I'm coming up to the corner, it's a patch of fog sitting there. And I thought, well, this is strange, because there's no fog anywhere around. So as I got closer to it, it went whoosh, right into a shape of a boy standing there in the middle of the intersection. Well, you never seen stones fly so fast in your life. I went right through it, and I got in home, and I'm all tuckered out, and my mom looks at me and she says, what's the matter, you see a ghost? And I says, well, now that you're asking. So I told her what I seen, and she said, oh no. And here again, I didn't know any story about that at all. I didn't know what had happened there at all. And she called Mrs. Wright, and Mrs. Wright told her, oh, you're kidding. That was my son. He got killed there. I never did. I only seen him once. Yeah. Whether it was the time he got killed or whatever, or things were just right for him to appear, I don't know. Yeah. But boy, I stopped going to practices after that one.
I bet.
Yeah. Any more that you wanted?
I don't remember what else we talked about.
Oh,
It's
about
been-
my grandfather. That was the first one that I can remember that ever happened.
Okay.
Actually, I feel why I'm running into this once in a while is because my closeness to death when I was 2 years old, which I don't remember, but my parents told me. I was born in 1950, and I was in Brant Memorial Hospital at the time with whooping cough and diphtheria. And apparently back then, when you had one of them, you were pretty well spent. And I was in an oxygen tent, they told me, and Dad says visiting hours were over, so they told them that they had to go. And Dad says, we just made it to the elevator, and he says something in his head told him to go back. And when they came back, I was clinically dead. My heart had stopped, I was turning color, I wasn't breathing, and the doctors, well, obviously got me back going, kick-started. And
Thank God.
I think that's why I started experiencing this. And also, when I was about, I guess about 13 or 14, I had what you called adolescent epilepsy.
Okay.
And through history, if you go back to history, they always looked at people that had epilepsy, either witches or they were very close to the spirits.
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know, that's electrical and maybe it's got something to do with it.
Yeah.
But I remember I was saying about 10 or 11 at the time. We were living down Quigley Side Road. My grandfather, my mom's stepdad, was in the hospital in Brent Memorial at the time. And I didn't know how bad he was or anything. I just knew Grandpa was in the hospital and he was getting better. You know, the doctors are looking after him. Well, I went to bed that night, and as I was just dozing off, something made my eyes open up, and there's Grandpa at the foot of the bed. And he's got his arms outreached to me and walking towards me. And then he disappeared under the bed. I screamed and I ran up to the living room. And they said, what's the matter? I said, Grandpa's dead. 10 minutes later, they got the call. As he's walking towards me, he just deteriorated and went under the bed. I've had two. I haven't had them for many years now. I've had 2 episodes where I've gone somewhere, whether it was in the woods by myself, like I like doing metal detecting, or I was out there taking pictures of wildlife, and all of a sudden I felt something very evil, very bad, and it was almost engulfing me. And as it was, I would get angrier and angrier to the point I blacked out. And then when I awoke, I wasn't in the same place I was.
Well,
So nobody could explain that to me except I had a native shaman, or which they don't call them witch doctors, shamans they call them.
Charmin, yeah.
He says, it sounds like you're a shapeshifter, you go after evil spirits. I says, I don't want the job. He said, you don't have any choice. I said, well, fortunately for me, I've only had 2 of those, and they were quite a few years ago. So.
Yeah.